Podcast Network. This is the Lifestyle Live Podcast.
Faces you know and a team you can trust. Stories that form your heart. Lifestyle Live. Lifestyle Live.
Amber Hankins here, and on this Lifestyle Live podcast episode, our Amicia Ramsey spoke with acclaimed civil rights lawyer Nekima Levy Armstrong about her personal journey to becoming a civil rights lawyer, where things stand today in regards to racism in the digital age, and her children's book, J is for Justice. This is the Lifestyle Live podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Lifestyle Live. Lifestyle Live.
That's right, guys. It is Black History Month, and we have a very special guest, someone who I would love to introduce you, someone who I've even talked to about high-profile cases like what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd. She was one of the individuals who sounded the alarm before any of protests or anything started to happen. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Miss Nekima Levy Armstrong. She is an attorney and a civil rights activist here to talk about Black history and where we are today from the digital age up until what happened in the past, so we can get a little bit of understanding. Nekima, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm happy that it's Black History Month.
Me too. And it's an opportunity to pay homage to the history, but also see where we are today. I want to talk to you just about your insight on how you became, to tell us a little bit about you, how you became an attorney, and then you got into being a professor, but some of the things that you're doing in Minneapolis.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. I am a resident of Minneapolis now, but I was actually born in Jackson, Mississippi in 1976. So about 8 years after the assassination of Dr. King. And I was born into a family that experienced the impacts of Jim Crow segregation and poverty. My grandmother picked cotton when she was a young girl. And so that's always been a part of my legacy. But when I was 8 years old, my mom moved my siblings and me to South Central Los Angeles. That was like night and day, going from a relatively quiet, segregated community in Jackson, Mississippi to LA, right in the inner city, and at around the time of the start of the war on drugs.
Wow.
And so
was this also maybe during the Rodney King era? Was that around that time too?
Yeah. So I moved to LA in the early 1980s. And so starting out, seeing a heavy police presence in my community, seeing young men cycling in and out of the justice system, and experiencing a great deal of poverty in our community. And then, fast forward early 1990, 91, we had two significant incidences that happened. One involved my middle school classmate, Latasha Harlins, who was a young Black woman who Tupac has rapped about her.
Wow.
But she was a young Black woman who went into a local corner store and was falsely accused of stealing a bottle of orange juice and wound up being shot at point blank range in the back of the head at just 15 years old, innocent and unarmed. That was my first introduction to this notion of whether Black lives really mattered. And then, within a year or so after that, we had the beating of Rodney King by the LA Police Department and the uprising that took place. So all of those things were a part of my upbringing and really helped to shape my perspective on civil rights and our need to continue to fan the flames to get the justice that we deserve.
Absolutely. So, growing up to the South and moving over into the West Coast and experiencing, similar situations and more overt racism, for a lack of better terms. Was that one of the reasons why you decided to become an attorney and pursue civil rights and civil justice?
Absolutely. I was about 9 years old when I made the decision that I wanted to become a lawyer. I had been seeing lawyers on television advocating for people, mostly white lawyers, but the way they were using their voices, it made me think maybe I can make a difference. If I become a lawyer, I can use my voice, I can speak up, and I can advocate. And so I followed that pathway, went off to boarding school in Massachusetts when I was 14, went to the University of Southern California for undergrad and majored in African American studies, then went on to law school and then went on to teach law. So I was a law professor for about 14 years, focusing on civil rights and racial justice.
Wow. So how did you actually transition into Minneapolis? And then talk to me a little bit about some of your advocacy. I mean, you even ran for mayor. And then what happened a couple years later? I mean, the death of George Floyd.
Mhm. Well, I became a law professor when I moved to Minneapolis in 2003. I got hired by the University of St. Thomas Law School, which is a faith-based law school here in the Twin Cities. And within a couple of years of being in Minneapolis, I realized that the stories about Minneapolis of being liberal, being progressive, being a place for all were just not true. And so during that time, as I started talking to Black folks in the community and recognizing their experiences, I decided to launch a civil rights legal clinic called the Community Justice Project, which actually still exists at St. Thomas. And through that process, we actually started problem solving law students alongside community members to challenge systemic injustices and inequities. So around 2005, 2006 is when I started doing police accountability work and challenging policies, challenging elected officials even who were not fulfilling their jobs or who were allowing police officers to harm members of the Black community. And then if we fast forward from there, around 2014, if you recall, Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. So I was one of several people who traveled to Ferguson. I participated in those protests as a legal observer through the National Lawyers Guild, documenting what was happening on the front lines. And then when I traveled back to Minneapolis, young folks approached me saying they were going to start a Black Lives Matter chapter. Would I work with them? And so from that point, literally the rest is history. We started organizing consistently. In 2015, we actually held an 18-day occupation outside of the 4th Precinct Police Station after they had killed a young Black man. And after that, Philando Castile, who was killed in 2016, and on and on. So our movement continued to grow and to build, and we were relentless in the streets and in the halls of power, using our voices and fighting for justice. So by the time May 25th of 2020 happened, with regard to George Floyd being killed, we already had a full-scale and consistent movement. So we were ready for that most horrific moment, you know, that many of us have witnessed.
Yeah, absolutely. A moment that many of us will never, ever forget. Nekima, I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. So what happened to Mike Brown, it feels very close to me because I have family who live in the St. Louis area. And when it happened, to see my city that I love so much in turmoil, it really affected me. But I felt the same way about when I saw what happened to George Floyd. And a lot of this was caught on camera, or we start using digital platforms in order for these things to be exposed. Can you tell me how that plays a role in today's time? In previous years, we didn't have things like that to capture these moments.
Well, I think about during the lynching era when we had Ida B. Wells, who became a journalist, a Black woman who would travel around and document the lynchings, primarily of Black men throughout this country. But if you recall, when Barack Obama was president of the United States and these issues started to rise to the surface around police accountability, one of the things that he recommended was body camera footage being used in these situations. That was a systems response. The people use their iPhones, their, Androids, whatever folks on the ground had access to start documenting and telling their own stories about what was going on. And we saw that come to fruition on the night that George Floyd was killed. 17-year-old young Black high school student, Darnella Frazier, rather than going into the story as she intended, she stopped there and she captured that horrific moment for the world to see. And we were able, if she hadn't captured that moment, it's very possible that George Floyd, no one would really know who he was, what happened to him. There wouldn't have been any real accountability. But the fact that that footage was so raw, that it captured so much of the essence of what was happening from different angles was, I would say, a wake-up call for many people around this country and around this world to understand the systemic injustices and brutality that Black people still endure in this country.
Wow. Nekima, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's Beyond J for Justice. Is that a book that you wrote and published? Can you tell me just a little bit about that and just going beyond the advocacy of the book?
Absolutely. So I wrote a children's book called J is for Justice, and I wrote it through the lens of being a mother on the front lines with my young child. So my youngest daughter is 6 years old. She has been out there with me since she was in the womb, absorbing what happens on the front lines. And so when she was a toddler, we'd be pushing her in her stroller and she'd be participating in protests. And so my experience as a mother caused me to be more conscious of the fact that there were many children out there, day in and day out with their parents, marching, demonstrating, protesting, saying Black Lives Matter and demanding justice. And so I thought about the fact that children needed a tool to help them process what was happening on the front lines, as well as the power and importance of using their voices. I don't think that children are ever too young to speak up when they see wrongdoing or when they see injustice. So I've used my book to go into classrooms and to read the book to children, to have them read to me. We chant together and we talk about some of the injustices that happen and the role that children can play. And I also talk to them about the children during the Civil Rights Movement who led the Children's March, who braved fire hoses and police dogs, and some of them went to jail, kids as young as 8 years old, to stand up for our freedom. I don't want that legacy to be erased. I want children to understand that they are just as much a part of our movement for racial justice as any adult may be.
Wow. And Nekima, thank you so much just for that insight. And just as we just bring this conversation to a close, is there some, I don't want to say advice, but is there a message that you could share with individuals specifically? I mean, of course, this is Black History Month, but just beyond the month, as the work that you've continued to do, it started before and it's not ending.
Absolutely. There is still so much work to be done. And I think at this point, for those who are passionate about these issues, it's not a matter of feeling like, there's nothing they can do or feeling overwhelmed. It's a matter of at least choosing one fight and organizing with like-minded people, being consistent, being persistent, using your voice, using digital media tools to help organize folks, and getting involved until you start to see change. And sometimes that means finding that low-hanging fruit and then continuing to pull until a huge change begins to happen. I believe that those are the building blocks to successful movements. And again, we have a lot of work still to be done. We can't rest on our laurels simply because we've seen a few convictions of police officers. That is just a drop in the bucket compared to the overarching changes that need to happen in the spirit of Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and so many others who came before us to fight for our freedom.
Well, thank you so much. Again, this is Nekima Levy Armstrong. I will say, in the words of John Lewis, continue to do or get into some good trouble.
Lifestyle Live. Lifestyle Live.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, this is the Lifestyle Live Podcast. Thank you for listening. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And connect for even more on Facebook and at lifestylelive.tv.
Faces you know and a team you can trust. Stories that form your heart.